Um, I am really happy to welcome to the stage, or if they're not comfortable like me on the stage down here, Zainab, Nasser, and Cedric Nzomo, who are the founders of, so Zainab's the founder of Play Academy Africa. So as we sat here this morning talking about 16 to, let's say, I don't know, when do people finish their PhD? In Africa, sometimes it takes a lot longer because of gatekeeping. But we want to take it further. So Nala wants to push how we're looking at learning spaces and how we're looking at engagement, just recognizing that children are becoming very aware and we need to start earlier on how we think and how we engage children around, just their identity, learning to protect themselves. And let's create the mindset and the values much earlier so that when we're getting, especially young men at 30, we're not starting from scratch. So Zainab and Cedric.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this on?
I think it's on.
Much,
it's
on. For that introduction. I'm really quite honored to be here and very inspired from the sessions I attended yesterday. And especially as someone people who are proudly raising Pan-African feminists, a couple of them, and someone whose work is very much in its infancy. Quite literally, I work with children between the ages of 0 and 10 and their parents.
Yeah, I'm also honored to be here. Honestly, it's a very humbling event. Also humble to share a stage with my wife, who is way more accomplished than I am.
Yeah, so my journey to this stage began when my daughter was born. The Playroom community launched a month after she arrived, and with our approach being rooted in the belief that as caregivers, we have to be proactive, we have to be resilient and unwavering in our agitation and fostering of positive change. When I learned I was expecting my daughter, it was at the height of the pandemic. And even with that, I braved going out into the world 4 or 5 times just to get a scan to confirm that I was expecting a girl. Each time hoping that the last ultrasound technician was a quack. They weren't. And it wasn't because I thought my daughter was going to be any less than. It wasn't because I thought having a son would be better. It was because suddenly I was hit with this fear and anxiety of looming uncertainty that I hadn't felt with my son. And I knew why, because I had been a girl and I was a woman and I knew what world I was bringing her to. It shouldn't have taken having a daughter to have that level and to feel that sense of urgency. I knew the world wasn't crafted for us to thrive. And amidst that shame, amidst that fear was like a tinge of shame that I had known. And somewhere along the way, I stopped fighting. I assimilated. I toed the line. I settled. And now I was going to bring her into this world, and I didn't know how I would explain to her, how I would encourage her to occupy space, how I would encourage her to know that her voice mattered, that she could do anything and be anything in the world when I had done nothing to prepare it for her. If you're a parent, you know that children they will do as you do and not as you say. Often publicly, preferably in a supermarket or a family gathering. So it is equally vital when we start thinking about accountability that we turn the lens to ourselves and examine our role in shaping the world our children use to define their norms and their accepted standards. So we owe it to them to create an environment that fosters inclusivity, equal opportunity, and social justice.
My journey to this stage began when Zain said we need to talk about accountability. Um, I've been fortunate enough in my life and in my professional career to work in spaces where I could prioritize meaningfulness and purpose over profitability. So, as I guess a brief, thank you. So, I guess as a brief context there, I work in agency and in production. So, I tell stories and I sell stories, and I've been able to um, strike out and kind of do what I believed in. I didn't always do what I believed in, though. I wasn't very intentional about it. And like she said, it really took for our children to come into our lives for me to actually make that a priority. And it started really when my son was born, so before the daughter. And I realized that there was a lot that was lacking in the stories that we're telling. There was a lot that was lacking in the roles that we were modeling, especially as fathers. And I, one, started looking for work that would help kind of push, the change that we want to see in the world. But then two, I also started sharing my journey in fatherhood online. And the main reason for this is when you look at dad vlogs, pods, and blogs, and all the other orgs, you'll find that it's mostly dads being portrayed as, dad jokes or discussions around man talk, and not very much around parenting or the change that's needed, especially as the people who are going to be raising future generations to be accountable for their actions.
Yeah, so empowering the next generation requires us to challenge societal norms and harmful stereotypes that we've lived with. We have to examine the language that we use with these children. They are blank slate. When does boys will be boys turn into boys will be accountable for their actions? When do we start teaching them that? Are we really okay with reading them stories where someone can climb up a window and kiss you as you sleep, a complete stranger, to rescue you? What message does that communicate? What does it mean that something is a girl's toy and something is a boy's toy, that this is pink and this is blue? What lines are we drawing that early, just as they're starting to form their identity? We must instill in our children that they are deserving of respect and safe spaces, the belief that they're not limited by their gender and are capable of achieving anything they put their minds to. Our community of parents is committed to consistently provide our children with positive role models, inclusive environments, and equal opportunities as a way to dismantle the barriers that hinder their progress. As parents, we cannot wait for institutions to catch up with us. In our homes, that's where the power is. We literally are holding the next generation in our hands. We have learned that in Africa, we have probably the youngest generation. So what we do now, there is a level of urgency to make sure that from the beginning, these kids are educated and they're empowered. And it starts with us parents agitating for that change.
A good way to agitate for that change and a good way to kind of begin that progress is looking at the stories that we tell to these kids. And I think this is where we see that we have a responsibility in the stories we create, in the stories we curate, in the stories that we share, to be very intentional about making sure that we showcase, that we model the transformation that we want to see in the world. We were lucky enough to be able to choose what we exposed our children to. We're able to order books and to curate them from many different places around the world and through many different connections. And through Play Academy Africa, we've been able to share those stories with other people in the different activities and events and exposures that exist. And now we can see that there's like a community of parents that are able to expose their kids to seeing different faces and different bodies, experimenting and exploring and excelling, and not just like the monochromatic protagonist that we grew up with that was pushing problematic patriarchal values like what she just talked about with climbing through windows and harassing people. So I think we need to be more conscious of this and to look at what we do, stories we tell, and how we can use those stories to deconstruct the problematic stories that we've been passed down to.
Yeah, so let me tell you guys something. It's like a trade secret, really, a horrible one. But in marketing, which is kind of our background and the career we are from, there is a term called pester power. Marketers basically exploit children's ability to nag, insist, demand, and basically wear their parents down into purchasing something. It's because research and experience has taught us that children are the easiest to influence and they are relentless. And that relentlessness has become a catalyst for change and revolution in many, many instances. And it starts with empowering them with a framework that gives them a basis of something to latch onto and run with. Intolerance and apathy is a uniquely adult problem. So we must come together to support kids, and it has to be a collaborative effort. By empowering caregivers, encouraging community cohesion, and demanding equal access to quality education, we can equip kids, boys and girls alike, with the knowledge, the skills, the confidence to break down these barriers, to hold us accountable, and to challenge societal norms that no longer serve them. I'll tell you, when we started Play Academy, I had no idea where we would find the resources, how we were going to do this. I had the dream of having this storytime podcast that, all kids could listen to, diverse stories where they are at the center of it all. I had a dream of having, regular play dates, caregiver workshops. I didn't know how I was going to achieve that. But believe it or not, in these 2 years, everything that has ever happened has been driven by parents. They've been at the center of volunteering, cooking for our entire, book club, raising funds. They are committed, and I feel like it is through this fire and our community and our community growing that we are able to now push and agitate for changes in institutions, like in our education system, in the retailers who are stocking books, in the content that our kids consuming either on like YouTube or in their books.
So I'm just going to say something because she's very humble. There's a lot that has changed in the space that we're in because of the content that she's created, the story that she's modeled, the possibilities that she's shown to parents out there who really want to make a difference. Me being one of them. I think that it matters a lot what we expose our kids to, but it matters a lot the roles that we model. And that doesn't just matter for them, it matters for other parents to be able to see it. So I'm inspired, thank you. It matters for other parents of our parents to see it because we've had our parents change their perspectives, on the roles that they played in our lives. But it also matters for the kids to be able to understand that this behavior, this change, this expectation needs to be higher. My upbringing, I was brought up by, my mom was a professor. I've noticed there's a lot of academic people here. She's a professor, she's a gender and human rights activist, she's a lot of different things, and she raised me with feminist values, but the thing that changed my life was having the kids. So like she said, it's not what you're told, but what you see people do that impacts you. For as much as she raised me with those stories and told me what she wanted me to know, I still hung around with guys who didn't share those values. The change that comes about because of people being not just courageous, but driven enough to take it upon themselves, with or without resources, to do the things that need to be done and tell the stories that need to be told and stand on stages when they don't like making speeches. Change what is possible for the community, and it changes it for the future. Because at the end of the day, what we want as the youngest continent in the world is to be the most progressive continent in the world. And that comes with quantity by numbers, but it also comes with the quality based on the examples that are set. So, yes.
So in conclusion, just to tie to that fear that I had when I had my daughter. She's a very fearless 2-year-old, turning 3 now, by the way, so that fear doesn't really exist anymore. I remember going to my mom, who I knew she would understand because, well, she had a daughter at a time that was probably tougher than I was. And she reminded me of something. She reminded me that the dangers were real, the dangers behind that fear were real, but so was the capacity for my daughter to be exactly what was needed for that change to happen. And hopefully the changes that we make will pale in comparison to what they achieve. And I am Nala because I truly believe that when we come together, we become a force that cannot be ignored. Thank you.